Dean, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
It's great to talk
I
to you.
appreciate you staying with me. I've been so busy. I try to do most of everything that people ask of me. If it's going to be helpful to anyone, I'm pretty open to things. Sometimes I get a little busy.
I think your work as a body of work already in your life. I mean, if you look at artists these days, even just comparing to artists in the past, like Van Gogh, to have this level of success at this point in your life while you're still alive,
yes,
is not only encouraging just by your existence, but I think that your body of work gives a lot of people inspiration and hope. I think it's important work, and I thank you for addressing it, for taking that on.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I've certainly enjoyed being an artist, and it hasn't been easy by any stretch. But as you probably know, particularly when you want to go your own way and stay authentic to who you are as a human being.
Yes.
And so it can become contentious on both sides of the spectrum in regards to race and cultural identity and the type of work that you do, and there's a lot of layers of complexities that I was unaware of, but became more aware of as I became more aware of what art was about and what it encompasses. It's a lot of things.
Surprise.
Yes, surprises, right. So,
well, let's start us off for our listeners by having you talk for a few minutes about your education and growing up in the rural South. How did you overcome institutional roadblocks that in your early career that really are stumbling blocks for a lot of people?
Well, I grew up in a little town called Quincy, Florida. I was raised by my grandmother. It was a very segregated town. I was born in 1957. So I grew up right in the heart of the civil rights movement. And so my sensibility of the South was that, and I grew up in a very, very strong African-American community. My grandmother was, she went to church every Sunday. We had to go to church. There were different things, and I had all African-American teachers for the most part, initially early on, but that also changed. But I think that my sense of the world was very shaped by the dignity that I was around in my own community, African-American community. But I also saw a lot of layers of complexities within the African-American community. There was a lot of prejudice amongst people of color, even light complected Negroes and dark complected Negroes. It wasn't that we didn't get along, we did, but there was a lot of layers of complexities even within that. And there was also a certain sense of social class that was also within the Black community that I know a lot of people do not like to talk about. That also exists. But these are all just kind of, to me, extensions of racism in a different kind of way that infiltrated the psyche of even the African-American community as well. So I grew up with all these sensibilities. I learned about racism just by the way my grandmother worked and where she worked. She worked for people who had a lot of money. She worked as a cook and a cleaner in homes. And I was unaware that we were poor because most of us, we lived in the Black community, so we did not have privy to go over to the white community to see what they owned. But as we got a little older, we began to ride our bikes, and I began to see the enormous discrepancy of wealth within that community. A lot of the people there were invested in Coca-Cola, had a lot of Coca-Cola money there, extremely wealthy. They had huge mansions and stuff. And so we lived in a small little block house. Most of the people lived in wooden houses and stuff who were African-Americans and worked in tobacco fields and different things. So I also worked in those fields as well to help my grandmother pay bills and different things. And there was a lot of strong people in the Black community, but there was also a lot of alcoholics. My uncle Ben was an alcoholic, very talented musician. Could really sing, but saw no opportunity. So when you grow up seeing someone who was so talented and very handsome, very, very charismatic, you recognize that opportunity has a psychological effect on how you move in a society. And I was very, very much aware of a lot of things growing up. And I was always constantly analyzing my environment. And my grandmother was always saying the best way to get out of something was to educate yourself, because she felt like an education could free you. Just because somebody puts information in front of you does not necessarily mean that it's true and that it will serve you well to move forward in a culture. So you are to look at things. It doesn't matter that it's in a book. There's been a lot of lies in books, as we all know. So just because it's in a book does not make it true. But assessing your environment and looking at the world around you that's right before you is how I look at things and how I maneuver myself. And that's how I've emerged out of poverty. That's really how I've emerged out of poverty.
Well, I think that's true. And it's sad to say that it's taken me so long to figure out where the gaps were, these huge gaping holes in history that we weren't taught in school. And I first officially became aware of my white privilege. I was speaking to body trauma psychologist Resmaa Menakem, and we were talking about how, yes, in fact, white privilege exists by default in all people that are white people. And it suddenly hit me that, and I told him that, I said, you know what, I think I suddenly get this concept, basically that I can wake up in the morning and choose not to think about the issue of race. And simply the fact that I have that choice right there is privilege. And he said,
there's a sense
now
of
you
freedom.
get it. Yeah.
There's a sense of freedom there. Yes, absolutely.
Whereas it informs and it's interwoven with everything, I think, in the daily experiences of a person of color. They have to factor this in. It's there.
It's funny because you're saying this. As a child growing up, when I was like 6, 7 years old, I really didn't have a real heavy sense of it until we got a television. And the television became a kind of information highway for me as a young boy, watching Martin Luther King give his speeches. My grandmother we were all locked in whenever he was on television giving a speech, and as well as JFK, John F. Kennedy, and other political leaders, but mainly Martin Luther King. And my grandmother would pace the floor. She couldn't sit down while he was talking. And she said, they're going to kill him. He's too righteous. She said, he is too righteous, and he is a righteous man. And she said, they're going to kill him. I said, Grandma, don't say that. She said, baby, they're going to kill him. She was just constantly worried about him every time he would give a speech. She couldn't sit down. Sit down. I can still see her doing it.
Wow.
And I was, very young kid watching this.
Now, she had a really big influence on your life.
Absolutely.
And you've definitely persevered through a lot of rejection, experiencing, having to climb up out of, as you said, out of poverty. And even your junior high school art teacher, it seems, he was a big encouragement on you, but he told you that you would need to pick a side in order to succeed. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, he
talk
did
about that for a minute, and how you moved forward successfully on your own terms, gaining recognition and entry into galleries and museums.
Well, it's funny. I think that I grew up without my father in my life, who is now in my life. And I have a great relationship with my father now. I love him. My kids love him. But he never accepted me when I was a boy. I knew of him. I knew he had done really well in business, and I felt rejected by him. And whenever he would come to town, because he lived in St. Pete, and kids would say, "Oh, there's your dad," and so I always felt rejected by him. And so I thought, well, if I do something with my life, maybe he'll love me. But that rejection, when you get rejected by your own father, there is no thing deeper than a parent rejecting you.
I
So
agree.
the fact that I get rejected in the art world is a piece of cake.
Yeah.
So, um, and growing up working in tobacco and trying to have, a little financial stability for my family, helping and so forth. So I had enough rejection and hardship. So the art world, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Harris was saying, you gotta pick a side. And I just kind of laughed. I actually laughed. I said, "Mr. Harris, that's ridiculous." He said, "No, you just don't understand." He said, "But you will later."
Did he mean that you
And
have to pick specifically what would be considered Black art?
right, I had to pick a side. He said, he said, "Look, your problem is you're really talented." He said, "You're really talented." And he said, "But you want to do things your way." That's just not how it works in American culture. You can't that's not how it works. In order to get the right connections, in order to get to have the kind of certain kind of political aura or whatever it is to be Black and all this stuff. He said, you're going to make the Black people mad and you're going to make the white people mad because you're not going to exactly do what either side wants. And he said, it's hard to be your own man that way in this country. And I said, "But Mr. Harris, I'm doing art." He said, you will see. And boy, has that day not arrived. It has arrived. So, and I am my own man. In fact, I have had wonderful people in my life, like the Harrises, who took me around as a young kid, along with others. And he and his wife were two white, these two white people taking us around. We were only Black kids at this art show, and he was helping us, and they were criticized on both sides of the fence here, because there was a lot of you got to understand, there's a lot of mistrust between both sides. So, but in spite of that, he still helped. And so I learned in that lesson not to assess people totally by their race, but by their character as a human being. And throughout my life, have I ran into people who are bigots and racist? Absolutely. But the bottom line of it is I cannot allow myself to be constantly monitored by what Toni Morrison referred to as the white gaze. And so I decided I'm going to be a full human being. And you either accept me on that or you don't. And that's okay with me. That's okay with me. I mean, I love people on both sides of the fence, and there's craziness on both sides. And so in regards to race, and it's not that, that I'm aware as people of color, we have certainly suffered inhumanely. I'm very much aware of that. And I have had my own suffering with certain aspects of society growing up poor and trying to merge into the art world. The art world is full of a lot of layers. There's a lot of complexities to it. And I have looked at every angle. I've had to look at every angle to move forward because, there are people who are on foundations and there are different grants and different things. I applied for those kinds of things and realized that certain people are looking for certain things. And sometimes what you're doing does not appeal to them for whatever reason. And that's okay. They have their own agenda for what they think is great in this, and that's okay too. So I look at things, I look at rejection as another way for me to move forward, not to hold me back, but to look at every angle and say, well, this particular angle is not going to work for me. I have to find another way. Redirect. If I'm going to do what I want to do and not be predicated by what somebody's judgment is all the time, I have to figure out a way to build financial resources to be able to move forward without caring about such judgments. And that's very freeing. It's very freeing to be able to do what you want in spite of what either side is saying to you about what you're doing. That I feel that what I'm doing is true to me, it resonates to me as a human being, and I'm going to keep moving whether someone likes it or not. It's not my issue. My issue is to stay true to myself, and the world is big enough where sometimes people come around later who did not see the full picture of what you were doing. Sometimes that happens much later. And so I've learned to just stick to who I am as a human being and move forward and just look at people on an individual basis. And there are some people who have been enormously wealthy who have helped me, who have purchased my work. And there are other people I've met who've been enormously wealthy who was not interested in what I wanted, who were not interested in what I do. I didn't take that rejection as they just had a different way of looking at what they wanted for their collection. And so I just kept moving regardless. And you run across people who are, like-minded in some way and see what you're doing as serious merit and will begin to support you. And rejection does not always mean that the work is not deserving. It's not of serious merit. And I have read enough about art to know this, because there are artists who, as we know, have been, when I think about Thomas Eakins' Gross Clinic, done at the age of 30, it was rejected by the National Academy, these academias of art, and they had a lot of power. But we all know that is a masterpiece in American art today. And so those kinds of stories give me hope that just because someone is viewing something for the moment does not mean that history may come back and revisit what you're doing. You may not be as popular, or you may not be at the top of the pyramid doing this political movement in art. But down the road, you're going to have a whole new group of historians who will look at things with a different lens. And so the politics will not always be the same. And so the work you will be doing will be viewed differently. And so hopefully I have tapped into the human condition and not just race. And this is what I'm after.
I love that. I love that about your work and how you put together these complex images that have layers. The Civil War soldier is one that I'm thinking of, where he's got this apparatus around his head.
Yes.
Now,
yes. I that was in Prix de West this past year in Oklahoma City, and it was a commentary piece about slavery, and also again the neck being with the George Floyd issue.
Yes.
It was a part of that layer, how Black men were hung too, and this kind of slave apparatus thing was used to keep them from running away. It would stop them from being able to run through forests and trees and things. And it was a very heavy instrument.
I was going to say, it looks heavy.
Yeah, and the fact that they fought in the Civil War for their possible freedom. And I say possible because they had no idea what these men were going to do once the war was over. Were they really going to be free, or were they just go right back to slavery?
Right.
And so there was no guarantee for them at all. So, but still, they were on the front lines for freedom and fought to equalize, to make things equal for people.
Well, it's remarkable.
And even after all that, if you look at the history of the military, even in this country, Buffalo Soldiers, you can go, World War I or II, and you can, in some of these men, then the things that they went through to get recognition for the Tuskegee Airmen. There's a lot of layers of history in that. And so, I know I got a lot of attention at Prix de West, because if you know anything about Prix de West, it's a very interesting show. It's about the West, and it's also a lot of romanticism in the show, which is nothing wrong with it. But trying to have a different kind of cultural conversation about America. It's particularly a difficult conversation about Black men in America and how they helped build this country, and honoring them in some way, and also to look at the brutality of slavery. So I wanted that instrument around his neck, and along with the military uniform to show power, and also the way they were discriminating and treated basically as subhuman, as animals. And that was a horrific thing. And we do need to have those kinds of conversation. And I think artists can bring a visualness to it to make people question it. Not always about race, but the human condition and how we treat one another. So I'm glad you brought that painting up, because I'm in a show now that's called Encounters. It will open in December at the Huntsville Museum of Art. and the curator had selected 32 works, and that was one of the works that he chose for the exhibition. I sent him a large body of work. So I was very thrilled that he chose it. And in fact, I didn't expect it to sell at Prix de West. This was a selling show because I know it's a very conservative market. And I wanted the work back, quite frankly, but I wanted it seen. And I'm glad I have it back. I don't plan on putting it on the market.
It should be in a museum.
Trying to show it in as many museums as I possibly can to
Yes.
stimulate conversation. So,
well, and I think that your art does serve as really a portal to that discussion. I really believe that. Specifically, your recent paintings, Admission, not a recent painting from 2003, but No Way Out, that was recently acquired by the Columbus Museum of Art. And congratulations.
Thank you.
And that is a very inspiring story, how it was picked up and it was followed and kind of curated into the museum by supporters and collaboration. And talk about that for a minute for me. And the painting itself, which I shared with my husband this morning, and he also made the comment that you would expect from the perspective, which we'll talk about in a second, I'm sure. But how you choose to use paintings to lead people into really a healing process in their perception of current social constructs.
You know, a lot of it is based on my own experiences as a person. I've gone into stores and had people follow me, you know, thinking I'm going to take something. And I've had people, you know, clench their wallets on elevator. You know, I've gone through the gamut. And so, you know, I know about the imprisonment of Black men in jail and this kind of thing. But what I was really after with No Way Out was the perception of the Black male. And it was no way out because it seemed like no matter what we did, we were still we were in jail in some way psychologically, though not necessarily the physical jail. So when I did No Way Out, I knew by putting him in a box, which is what people try to do to me as a painter. They try to put me in a box. They want me in the black box, you know, and I don't want to be in the black box. I want to be free. So, you know, when you look at No Way Out, I first presented this painting at the Charlotte Street exhibition in Kansas City. It was a grant that I received from the Charlotte Street Foundation. And the critic really went after it and really talked about the work and actually picked up pretty quickly on the concept, which I was thought, this is interesting. He actually picked up on my concept. And most people didn't. When they see it, they think this person's in jail.
Right.
So when I first showed the work, it was at Bryant Galleries in New Orleans. And at the time, I didn't know that there was an attorney that came over to me. He said, tell me about this work. I said, well, what do you think it's about? And he went on about the incarceration of Black men in prison and so forth. And I said, really? I said, well, he's not in prison. He said, yeah, but he is in jail. And I said, no, I said, you're in jail. The viewer is in jail.
Good for you.
I said, he's free. He's on the lighter side of the wall, you know, and so he was just so fascinated with that. I said, so because you saw the bars and it was a Black man, you just assumed he was in prison. He couldn't possibly be free. And he certainly wasn't finely dressed. So, so that became a really good conversation. And he bought the painting right away. He spent quite a bit of money on it. And the next thing I look up, the painting it's at the gallery in St. Augustine. I handles my work now. The collector was wanting to sell it. And I thought, boy, I should get this thing back, you know, trying to figure out how to get it back. And lo and behold, a lady saw it, I can't think of her name right now. She saw the painting at the cutter and saw the painting sit, because the painting was there for maybe 2 or 3 years.
Was that Kathy?
Yeah, Kathy, yes.
Okay.
And so from Ohio, and she saw the painting and it just haunted her after the George Floyd thing. She could not get the painting out of her head. And so she called the gallery and she was on and on about when she was visiting again, she saw it again and she said, I just have to get this painting. So she purchased it. And so she said, but it doesn't belong in my home. It needs to be in a museum. And so when I called about the painting, I was curious about I was trying to figure out how to get it. And so Nicole said, oh no, someone's bought it. I said, you're kidding me. I said, oh, really? I said, when are you going to do it? She said, well, she's trying to get it in a museum. I said, really? I said, wow, that's where it belongs. And so we had dialogue, and I said, well, where is she from? She said, she's from Ohio. I said, well, what part of Ohio? Columbus. I said, oh my God, this is too crazy perfect. I went to school in Columbus, Ohio. And I said, the first museum I ever went into was the Columbus Museum of Fine Art. That was the first museum I've ever gone into. And I went through room after room after room looking for anything that looked like me, and there was nothing on the wall of any people of color at all. And I said, how about we approach them? And so she agreed, and we approached them, and they acquired the painting. And so I'm very thrilled. I have not heard any more about it going on the wall or anything else, or what's going on with it. I would like to know a little bit. I know that they accepted her terms in terms of it going on the wall, because she felt like it was a very pertinent conversation. And to come to find out, her father was involved with the civil rights movement. So there was another connection for her with that. But she wanted to do something to help. She said, I feel like I needed to do something to help. And she felt like this painting would just stir so many different conversations with people. And so I'm hoping at some point it will make the wall. So, and in fact, I need to check on that and see where that's at. So
yeah, that needs a permanent room, a permanent spot. It certainly does.
It really is a good conversation piece about perception of African-American men, because we all know the Trayvon Martin story where people, he's walking home and you're suspicious. We've had so many stories like this where we're always a suspect or a criminal in some way. And then psychologically, the painting also is in a box. You still see the bars. So though he's free physically in sort of a physical way, he is not totally free in the world that he is occupying. Though he's out there, he's free, but psychologically,
right,
we're still being challenged all the time by the way we look.
Yes, and in the painting, the bars are overlaying him and his face and his body, and even if he's not in there, they're still affecting him and informing his world and how people see him.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. So it's a great, I think it's a really good, timely work. And I do know sometimes when somebody said something to me about conceptual work. I had put one painting in the West out at the Gene Autry. It was called Echoes of History. And the guy was like, oh my God, this painting, he said, oh, it just hits me in the face. He said, I see there's a lot of conceptual work. He said, but sometimes it just isn't well done. He said, but this stuff is well done. He said, this is really well done. It makes you really look at it.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, the conversation, because that's always been sort of the interesting dialogue with realism. Does it challenge us? Does it move us in the modern world that we now occupy? So I'm always concerned with that kind of conversation, whether it touches on the moment. Because as we know, the artists painted their times, they engaged their moment in history. And so this is what I'm hoping, that when people see his work, they will remember the George Floyd situation. They will remember that this is linked to history, not just for the moment, but throughout American history in regards to Black men and Black people in this country in terms of imprisonment and freedom as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it will spark those conversations. And so, as a white person, I also would like to get into the conversation. I would, and help in some way. And I would like some of that to be through my art, because I do like to approach weightier subjects and really bring them to people. I think that is a forum where you can transform the conversation through visual art, among other arts. And so, how can white people really enter this conversation in their own art without feeling their privilege somehow undermines their message?
That's a good question. And I guess I don't really know. I think, an artist should not be concerned about the audience. When I look at a news report or when I look at history, I'm going to have a visceral reaction to the moment. And so as an artist, we are not obligated by the public. We are obligated by our own sense of humanity as full human beings. And I think if you can keep that at the forefront, you can maneuver yourself through the world and not feel threatened by bringing any challenging work to the forefront that's going to help us grow as a society. Now, if you're constantly worried about, like, for example, I've done paintings that people have told me, you might affect your audience, you might not, probably won't sell that. It seems like the commerce part of it becomes more important than the work. That's always been troubling to me. The work, the human part of what you're doing should be the most important. Am I concerned about making a living? You're darn right I am, because I want to keep doing my work.
Right.
But I am more concerned when I see us as human beings treat each other in such an inhumane way that it just makes me just want to go after it. And it doesn't have anything to do with money. It has something to do like, this is some foul crap. This is wrong. We need to look at this, and we need to look at what we've become and what we are, and how to make ourselves better. We all know that when people have a lot of economic power, not all people, so I don't want to put everybody in a box, but we know power. When you say something that someone doesn't quite agree with, who have a lot of power, behind the scenes, people start pulling the strings and trying to do things that they know are not right. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but let's have a civil conversation and try to come to some agreement of how we can move forward. We all know, look, even in the art world, there's classism, there's, where you went to school, did you get a degree from this person, did you study with this person, did you, all that is real, people. And if anybody's telling you it's not real, they're not being honest. It is what it is. I'm not here to hate on anyone for their little social constructs and how they maneuver through the world. But poor people, they need to recognize, look, I tell my kids, they would say, oh, Dad, that's not fair. I said, baby, the world ain't never fair. It ain't gonna never be fair. Now, you do what you can to be right. I said, but there are a lot of people not interested in fairness. They're interested in money. They're interested in fame. They're interested in other things, because we're very complex creatures. And so, but, my thing is, do what you love. And if you see something that is wrong and you feel that you have enough talent where you can address it, address it, because it makes everyone better. Now, like I said, you don't have to agree with everything, but it creates the conversation to move us forward. Because if everybody's hunky-dory and everybody's comfortable, there's not any movement.
Right.
If you're too comfortable, not any growth. When you look at great inventions and great things that have happened throughout the centuries, people had to do a lot of failing to make certain things happen. And so we as human beings, we have to be willing to fail. We have to be willing to risk. We have to be willing to put our emotions aside and use our more rational human side to move forward. We have to put aside greed and wealth and power if we're going to move into the human condition in a more moral sense. But because we all know that money can corrupt almost anyone if you're not careful, because we're visual creatures. We like acquiring things, some of us, and sometimes we do vicious things to make that happen. But at the end of the day, when you do acquire something, was it acquired with honor? Was it acquired with staying true to oneself. And when you stay true to yourself and you do acquire something, you're still free. You're still free. No one owns you. No one can yank the rug from under you, because you built that foundation with your own truth, not with someone's wealth, not with someone's endorsement. You built that truth with your own self-wealth about the way you view the world. And so when people come after you, it's okay, because you built the platform that's yours. It's your platform. It's your voice. It has not been predicated upon one gallery controlling you, one gallery saying thus and so to their collectors. They see the work somewhere, and I've had galleries want an exclusive. No, you cannot. No one can own me that way. That's too much control. And so people don't always like that. Even galleries, some galleries don't like that. And so they don't pick you up. And I'm fine with that too. But you can't own me that way. I need my freedom, you know. So that's the way I roll. And I feel good about, you know, what I'm doing as a human being, and just trying to make the world better in my own small way, with my talent as best as I can. And if I can inspire someone and help someone along the way, yes, I will. I'll try to do that as well, you know. So, and at the end of the day, I'm not going to live forever. And when I'm almost at that point where my life is ending, I don't want to look back and go, God, I did a bunch of stuff I didn't like. I did it because I thought the art world would like it, and I thought that Black people would like it. I thought the white people would like it. I don't want to be that. I'm gonna do what I want. And if you like what I do, great. If you don't, that's still great too, because you may like someone else's work. So I'm all good with that. There's room for everybody, as my late friend Bob Ragland would say. There's room for everybody.
That's right.
Yeah.
So talking about making this work or that work because somebody says this is the box you should be in. Let's talk about perceptions of white art and Black art, and how people tend to define those two things. What is that all about?
Well, I think, again, that's been going on. That's an old conversation forever, in regards to if you look at art from a Eurocentric standpoint, you know, out of, you know, the Roman Empire, the pre-Raphaelites and all this, and Da Vinci, Picasso, all these people, you know, there's a certain, and I know realism falls under, because I had somebody say, oh, you paint like white people. I've had people say that to me even. And I just think that's just nonsense. I'll be honest with you. I've always looked at that as ridiculous, because I look at art as information. I look at art like a scientist. I look at art as a humanitarian. I don't care what race the person is. If I think it's good, it's interesting, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to absorb it, I'm going to learn from it. To say something is Black or white this is absurd to me. But I understand it, because it's a social construct. It is a social construct. And so I have always been able to free myself of it, though I'm African American, and I understand the racial component of it, and I understand the kind of the identity thing that people want to associate with themselves as having something of their own. When you look at the abstract expressions movement, a lot of that movement with Pollock and all of them came about because they wanted to break away from the tentacles of Europe, and the world was becoming more global. And so they wanted to have something that was purely American. Does that really exist? Questionable. So, because you cannot, as a human being, be in the world and see things and not absorb it. And so I think that when you look at Picasso's work, when the camera became into its full fruition, they began to look outside and look at more what you call outsider work, African sculpture. You could see some of the abstract quality moving into Picasso's work, because he collected those objects and saw a kind of sophistication in them, and a very highly intellectual sophistication, and he pulled from those. And so even when you think about instruments, A lot of the instruments are derivative from the continent of Africa. When you look at a lot of European violins and all this stuff, I saw an exhibition on the history of instruments, and a lot of it was a derivative of African culture on the continent of Africa. So what people have to understand, there's no such thing. Social constructs have turned us into being more tribal. And so I am trying, as a person of color, to break across those tribal ideology. And so there are some works that are influenced by Jacob Lawrence and other African-American artists and, pop culture. I'm absorbing all of it. I do not just see anything as Black art, as Black. I certainly recognize, like I said, I certainly recognize certain aspects of that, but I still look at it as information, as a full human being, no different than when you look at somebody like Matisse. You can see Jacob Lawrence, you can see the abstraction, you can see these artists pulling from one another. That is what it is to be fully human. That's what it is to be fully human. When you think about jazz and all these, jazz was created from a pull from different cultures, a melting pot of cultures that merged into New Orleans and created this jazz sound and this improvisation. And so by putting yourself in a box only just locks you off to being the full artist and full human being that you could be. So I'm going to look at everybody's work. I don't care what culture, and I'm not going to say it's Black anything. It's, I'm African American, but it needs to be art, and so I certainly understand it, because we've had a lot of racism here, and even when you think about music, Elvis Presley, there was always a conversation around Elvis Presley, because I remember this when I was a kid, and my grandmother, we used to watch Elvis Presley. She said, "Who is that singing?" And then she came out there, she said, "That's a Black man, kind of sound like he's Black, kind of sound Black." So we just kind of laughed. And that just goes to show you his environment. Also, when you look at rap now, you have other people who are doing rap who are white guys. They're doing rap. So I think that this is just what it is to be human. And if they relate to, if you're a poor kid that's white and you're growing up in a trailer park and you're poor and you ain't got nothing, and you hear that visceral underground belly of poverty, it resonates with you. It doesn't matter. It's the same damn story. It's the same story. It doesn't matter about your color. It's the same damn story. So so the music gonna resonate with you. And I think it's the same way with, I've done people of some of my own relatives who had cancer, who's had Alzheimer's. That's not a Black thing or a white thing. That's a human condition thing. There has been slave traffic of all kinds of people. There have been different people who have been slaves throughout the history of the world and still are now even. So slavery is not just ours as people of color. This is a human condition, flaw, and bad. It's just a bad social construct. It's just what it is. I'm just willing to say it. Some people may not like what I say, and that's okay too. And I'm willing to have that debate as well. But it's just that we have got to look at certain aspects of what we do as just totally inhumane. Doesn't matter about your hair texture, your skin color, or anything else. If you're doing something that's really inhumane and foul, it is what it is. And that goes across every racial line, culture, religious ideology, because some of the worst wars have been fought over religion. And so let's face it, we are a flawed creature. And so, but in that flawedness, we can do better, but we have to be willing to look at the flaws with real eyes and stop trying to go back into our little tribes. It's not going to work anymore. We're in a modern world. We're in a global, international, modern world. We have got to look at these issues with real sensibility. We're going to annihilate each other because we have the tools now. We've created all this technology. We can just annihilate the whole world, but we're still fighting over color.
Yeah.
This is just insane to me. I'm sorry. This is just insane. We're going to the moon. We're breaking the sound barrier, and we're still acting barbaric. It's just crazy to me.
I
It's
always,
just, I'm sorry, it's just crazy.
well, I've been saying for years, what we really need in this world is a good alien invasion. To
Yeah,
just,
we need a predator.
you're either human or you're not human.
Yeah, we need a predator.
Problem
Here we
solved.
are,
Yeah.
and we got one. We got the virus
Yeah.
that's an invisible predator, but it is a predator. So when we don't have a predator, we just prey on each other. I don't know. I'm like, this is crazy.
Yep.
But one of the worst things too, in my assessment that I've been addressing over the years, is poverty.
Yes.
Everything is linked to poverty. People they can talk all this stuff. They can talk about a whole lot of stuff, but poverty is a huge, huge, huge human condition issue.
Yes.
Huge.
That's because it kills hope.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yep.
We see desperation on boards. We see desperation. We see desperation in so many parts of the world now, because now we have these satellites that can zoom us in on different parts of the world. And we see the travesty. When I was growing up, we had no clue of what war really looked like. Not really. The clue I had about wars when they came home and the soldiers would do the gun salutes.
Yeah.
They would shoot. And we thought it was so cool till we found out it was actually because people had died in war. Then we thought it wasn't cool anymore. We used to think that was the coolest thing, but we had no idea it was because someone had been killed in war. But
Wow.
now the information highway opens us up. Not only does it open us up, it opens us up psychologically. It positions us in society in a way psychologically that I didn't have. I had more hope in my little community. I didn't find out I was poor until I, got out, until I was a little bit older and understood. But now, with the images, my God, you know right away. It's a whole different kind of information highway for kids growing up now with the computers, and it can be psychologically crippling if you're poor, if there's not someone in your community to take you by the hand as a good teacher, as a good mentor, and say, look, there's a way out. You can do this. It's going to take more work on your part. Yes. Is the world unfair? Yes. But it does not mean that you can't move forward. And so, you have to give people who have little hope, because, there's this poverty is just a huge crippling factor psychologically, health-wise, education-wise. It crosses every racial barrier as well.
That's true. And I think that the more access that we have to information these days, the more, you mentioned it, the more that we have to watch out that people don't put themselves in their own confinement, because, as you were just talking about, they lose hope before they find a way to climb out of that. And that's why mentors and people that can lift other people up are so important.
Because when I went, for a while, I moved to Philadelphia. My grandmother, who raised me, got very ill, and we had to move to Philadelphia. One of her daughters lived there, and we moved there for a while. And I learned a whole lot more about growing up in the South versus growing up in the North, in a place like Philadelphia. In Florida, rural. You go here, urban. You talk about some serious stuff going on that they had gangs in Philadelphia.
Yep.
There was all kinds of stuff that I didn't understand. And I was picked on because I talked funny. I had a Southern draw. So they have this assessment about you not being as intelligent because you talk with a Southern accent. And it was a whole, and these were other Black people. And so again, I'm trying to tell you the education I've had, but as the longer I stayed up there, I assimilated more because my diction started changing and all this stuff. And I was in 9 CP, which is the highest, which called the college preparatory classes. And you had to work your way up to get into those classes. But the bottom line of it was, I recognized that there were certain perceptions of Black people in the South by people in the North, based on the way they talked and this and that. And so I learned that there was discrimination even with that stuff, and so I learned a lot about, people's perceptions, because like I said, I grew up in the South, but I also lived in Philadelphia for a while. And there was a lot of black on black crime. And in fact, I got in a fight with one of the gang leaders. And by the time I got off the school bus, my whole block, the whole street was blocked off with about 10 guys ready to,
Oh boy.
and one of my friends went and got his German Shepherd. My cousin Caroline, who was on the bus with me, ran and got my auntie. And my auntie came out there and she was like, so it takes all y'all to whoop him? It's going to take all y'all to whoop him. And at the same time, a police officer who lived across the street from us pulled up and came over and talked to them and took all their names, said, I know just who you are. I know you're the Center Boys. I know exactly who you are. And he said, if anything happens to this kid, you all will go down. And he told us that they had killed somebody, they couldn't prove it, but something that happened really tragic. But this was a gang, and this was a black gang. And some of these people grew up in very hard conditions, all kinds of stuff, because I knew exactly what these projects were. We didn't grow up that far from them, but our little area was a little bit more stabilized. And so I begin to recognize what poverty does to you. This was not all just them on their own. This was a lack of supervision. Both parents worked, they were struggling. Who knows what was going on there? And so when you see someone who's acting a certain way, you better understand the history of what that person is, because that has a psychological effect on their mental health and all that stuff. So, traumatized in different ways. And so it's hard to assess and judge them when you don't know their road. You don't know their hardship or their trauma. So that's why I said we're complex creatures, and our environment and our education affects us heavily, and how we're perceived and how people look at us, and what neighborhoods we're from, what social class we're from, what our parents do, what they do for a living. People are assessing you all the time and putting you in a box and in a certain kind of class. And that's psychologically crippling for anybody.
Yeah,
So,
it is. It is. It's when you limit yourself with your own perceptions and you buy into that and you're damaged by your environment.
Absolutely. And I had enough
the walls close in.
I had enough people in my life early on, like my grandmother, Mr. Harris, and I had so many different experiences across the board and I think that gave me a lot of freedom. Because I had those experiences early on, and I recognized the inhumane condition coming out of so many different venues and environments, I was able to move in society, in the white community, black community, on both sides of the fence, without feeling totally crippled by what was going on, because I'd experienced so much trauma in every angle of that of our society, that I had to look at it based upon the results that I was getting from that particular moment. Not that one moment would define me, but I would look for other positive moments on both sides of the fence that would help support my dream as a painter. And it wasn't always there in both communities. A little here, a little there, more here because they had more access and more money, less here, but there's still some people who were people of color who did not have very much and still supported me. And there were people of color who had a lot, who wouldn't buy anything, wouldn't support me at all. So you see what I'm saying? Yeah. But I don't know what their education was in art. They didn't understand art. They had a lot of money, but I would have people say, oh, well, so-and-so's got a lot of money. I said, that doesn't mean anything. Just because somebody has a lot of money and they're African-American and I'm Black, they think they're going to support me because they're Black. They're not going to if they have no sense of art. And people just assume because they're Black and you're Black and they're rich, they're going to support you because they recognize what you're doing. No. No. Don't fool yourself with that people out there who thinking all that. And I'm not saying that some won't help you, but do not go down that road. Bad road. No. Doesn't mean anything.
Well, which brings us to my wrap-up question. And before I ask it, I want to just tell you, thank you so much for being here today and spending your time with me and really unpacking all of these subjects. They're so important to talk about and bring context to. So wrap us up with your best advice for our artist listeners on how they can make meaningful art using their own inner compass, being true to themselves, that can bring them financial success. How can they do both?
That is good. Sometimes you have to, when I first, I had a job at Hallmark and I got let go and I was married at that time and my marriage fell apart and I ended up in a little bitty apartment on Armour Boulevard in Kansas City, apartment 913, still remember. And there I was with hardly no money, hardly. I just bought my first automobile thinking, God, how am I going to make this automobile payment every month? I had lost my job and trying to figure things out. And I recognized I didn't really care for illustration a lot, although I did illustration. I did some graphic design to help tie me over at times. But I was really frustrated at because I really didn't care for it as much because you had to, please a client. And so I always wanted to be a painter. I said, and I kept hearing so much about race and this and that. And I said, well, how can I take race out of it? And so the jury shows became my way of doing that. I said, nobody's got to know what color I'm saying things in. And so I found an avenue to stay true to myself and do what I wanted. And it worked out. And I think as the more success I had in that way, because I really wanted to give up and go back home. I wanted to go back to Quincy. And then I thought about it. I thought, what am I going to do in Quincy? I got an art degree. It's a poor community basically, other than the rich white people, and they may or may not support me. I need to figure this out. So I just decided to stay in Kansas City. It was cheap to live there, and so I was doing what I wanted, and it was successful. And I don't know if it was successful because I just poured my soul in it, and people responded to it. And was I frustrated? Yes, because my first show I didn't make very much money at all. And I said, oh my God, I got to figure this out. And so I kept hearing from galleries, your work too personal. And they would start trying to tell me what to paint, what to do, what they thought would sell. I was like, geez, I don't want to do that. That's touristy stuff. I don't want to do that. And they said, you're talented, but you're going to have a hard time because your work is just too personal. And I thought about that. And I said, and I would go to the museums and I would go, I said, what the problem is? I'm not reaching the right audience. I need the right audience. And the jury competitions began to give me that platform and give me a little bit more notoriety. I realized I started understanding the meaning of provenance behind an artist's name. I also recognized, that I was not from a prominent family. Did not have that going for me. There was a lot of artists who were from prominent families who they were taken care of, but they couldn't sell their work. So I had to figure all this out from a financial standpoint. But because I lived cheaply, I was still able to do what I want and still sell here or there. And it was enough for me. Now, at one time, did I think I was going to always be poor? Yes, I did. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to always be poor. So I went out and bought a book called How to Invest $1,000 to $5,000. Now, because my business sense had to come in if I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So I went out and bought this book, How to Invest $1,000 to $5,000. And I learned about Vanguard and American, all these different Fidelity, all these different investment companies. And that's where I learned about an IRA, was through reading this book. So I took out an IRA at American Century in Kansas City because I felt it was close. I felt more comfortable with it, And so I get my little printout. I get the little printout, right? It's like $1,000 in my retirement account. I looked in the mirror and I go, oh my God, you're going to always be poor. You're never going to have any money. and so I would get so depressed. I stopped looking. I stopped looking at it, and they will let put up to $2,000. Sometimes I could put 1,000, sometimes I could put $2,000. A year. Mm-hmm. And so, over the years, I just did that religiously, and I didn't look anymore at it. And so sales began to pick up with galleries here or there and the competitions. And so I was always doing what I wanted and finding a way to build some kind of financial stability. I didn't have any health insurance or anything. And I recognized how much it cost to go to the emergency room because I was so under such stress. My neck locked up on me. I couldn't move my head either way. Yeah, I was so stressed. I drove myself to the emergency room, looking, shifting my eyes back and forth just to get to the hospital. And they said, what kind of job you have? And I told them, and they said, oh my God, you're under so much stress. And so they gave me some pills to help me with stress.
Prednisone.
Yeah, and then I got a letter from Andrew Wyatt. That was a huge boost to me. After he saw my work in American Artist Magazine, they did an article on me, and I got my first museum show because of it. And I was doing what I wanted to do. And so things just start working out. And I recognized that maybe there is something divine in this world that, that is just there when you pursue something with your heart and honesty. And things were just falling my way. They didn't always fall my way, but they were falling my way enough to keep me going. And they were falling away enough my way for me to revisit my roots all the time. The pains I had in my little apartment was always of my family because it reminded me of why I left. We were poor, we had very little. My grandmother, who didn't even have the opportunity or a chance, I said, at least I got a chance. And so that kept me going. But the main thing was that I lived way, way below my means. I recycled everything. I did not throw away anything. If I messed up something, I gessoed over it and I used the paper again on the board again. I'm still the same way now. And so I have done extremely well. And I won't kid you on that. I have done really well. I can take care of my family. I have 2 kids and a wife. She's stay at home. I have done extremely well. I recognize that I am an anomaly in that way because most artists, have not been able to do that. But I've been very fortunate to get into galleries that were in an international market. I learned the difference between being in an international market and being in a gallery that's not in the international market. And the way I found that out was when I got a gallery in New Orleans. I could barely sell my very personal work of portraits. And this gallery was on Royal Street. He picked my work up. He wanted exclusive. I wouldn't allow that. And he said, what's it going to take? I said, a handshake. But I was aware of Bryant Galleries when I entered the show in Jackson, Mississippi, the Mississippi Watercolor Society. And a lady took me over to his gallery and every painting was sold. Watercolors.
Wow.
18, 20,000, 30,000. They were all red dots. And I remember the lady's name. Her name was Sandra Williams. And she said, what do you think? I said, wow, he sold everything. And she said, and she whispered to me, and you're just as good. I said, yeah, but I can barely get $1,000 for a big watercolor. And so when we left, I said, how is that artist able to get? She said, because he's with Bryant Galleries.
Okay.
She said, because he's with Bryant Galleries. I said, what? She said, Dean, Bryant Galleries is linked. He's wealthy. He's linked to the collectors. He knows them. They trust his judgment, the this and this. And that began, again, another educational component for me. And so over the years, I certainly didn't try to get in his gallery because I knew he wouldn't pay attention to me. But over the years, I was entering these competitions and winning awards. And I got invited to a show called the Hubbard Art Award for Excellence. The top prize was $250,000. I was the only artist of color in the show. And I got an article in Southwest Art Magazine. Bryant Galleries saw that article, called me up, wanted to represent my work.
Wow.
I was like, holy crap, exactly, but before that, I was in another show in Denver and I got a full page double spread in the Christian Science Monitor titled How Dignity Colors a Canvas. So I was getting all this provenance was starting to get behind my name. And then when he called, I thought, wow, this is great. I knew exactly who he was. But he wanted exclusive. And I said, no. He hung the phone up. Boom.
Dean! Did you not have that one moment where you were just like, what'd I do?
I was like, what just happened? Just because I said I didn't want to give an exclusive. I've never given anybody an exclusive.
What'd you do?
And so I didn't hear from him again. But then he saw me in a magazine again. The following year, he saw me in a magazine. He called me up again. He said, "This is Brian Allen from Jackson, Mississippi. You know," he said, "I want to represent your work. I probably could sell everything you do." He was telling me how much you could sell and all that stuff. I was like, "Yeah, you're right." So he said, I said, "Well, you called me last year," and I said, "You want exclusive?" And I said, "I don't do exclusive." He said, "Okay. Well, what is it going to take? What's it going to take?" And I said, "A handshake. A handshake. That's all it's going to take. Handshake, Mr. Bryant. I trust you." So he said, "All right." We did our first show in Jackson. We barely sold anything. He got so upset. He was pacing back and forth. He was so angry because his wife got on the phone and said, "Oh, Brian is just really mad because the collectors didn't show up for this young man. He's so talented. He's such a nice young fella." And so they didn't show up. "Brian is mad. He is just balling." And so he knew why they didn't show up, because I was Black. So I recognized it. I said, "Mr. Allen, don't worry about it." He said, "You know what? You're a great artist. You're a great artist. We're going to move your work to New Orleans, and we're going to sell your work out of New Orleans." And I told him I was working on my own book. And at that time, this was 20 some years ago. He said, "Oh, art books don't sell. That's a waste of time." But well, I was fully invested already. So he said, "I got a book I did on the arts. I still got a bunch of them in the warehouse. Can't give them away." So I said, "Really?" I said, "Can I see it?" He said, "I don't have one here. I'll send you one." Sent me one, and it was mostly black and white. Well, the one I was working on was in color. So I'm trying to tell you how I built my career here a little bit. And a lot of the galleries at the time told me, "Don't do it. It's vanity press. It's vanity. Don't do it." This is 22 years ago, 24 years ago. So I did this book 24 years ago called Dean Mitchell, The Early Years. And it was $75,000 to do that book. It's a whole other story to tell you how I came up with the money. But anyway, the bottom line of it is I was doing this book, and he told me, they don't sell. And I had a publisher who wouldn't do it because I was Black, and they couldn't sell a book by a Black artist, all this crap. So I decided to do it myself, and the dealers were just outraged by its vanity. So when I finally did do the book, I sent it to the publisher who was doing these prints of mine, and he said, "Is this your book?" I said, "Yeah, it's the book I was telling you I want you to do." He said, "We were talking about this book a couple of years ago, and I kept telling you no." And I said, "Yeah, Mr. Usher, you did." And I said I was going to do it myself, and he laughed. He said, "So how are you going to get?" He said, "Who's going to pay for it?" And I said, "I am." He said, "Who's going to write?" I said, "I am." He said, "Who's going to design?" I said, "I am." And so when he got the book, he thought another publisher had done it. He said, "Who published your book?" And I said, "Didn't you look at the table of contents?" He said, "Dean Mitchell Studios, is this the book you were talking about you were going to do?" I said, "Yeah." And the same thing with Brian. He said, "Wow, this is a great book. Who published it?" I said, "Mr. Allen, look at the book." And he said, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful book. How can we get copies of it?" I said, "I got 3,000 of them in my garage. You can have as many as you want." Well, here's the thing. When they got the book, my sales tripled.
Wow.
My sales tripled. And I said,
What?
"Okay, here's part of the answer, is that publishers didn't want to publish books on artists of color. I saw Matisse, I saw Picasso, I saw Andrew Wyeth, I saw art, but never any artists of color. When I did see artists of color, they were always in a big old book with 20, 30, 40 of them. Never could see a body of their work." And so I decided to do my own book, and that made a huge difference in my life. I made a huge profit on that book, and it brought me provenance. I could tell my story. I could list my awards and different exhibitions I've been over the years. And I'm telling you, it worked like a charm. Now,
What venue did you promote it through?
American Artist Magazine. Okay. And because I entered all these shows over the years, I had won all these different awards. I had a huge following of artists that I didn't know I had. And I was selling books like crazy. And then I did shows, and I would show up with my books at the exhibitions I was doing. I did a show at the Foothills Art Center. I think we sold about $5,000 worth of books at Foothills Art Center.
Wow.
When I did a show there. In fact, the Denver Art Museum director at that time called up Carol Dickerson because she told me. She said, "Denver Art Museum called over here, wanting to know, what's going on up in the Foothills at the Foothills Art Center, all these people flocking there." She said, "Well, we got a show by Dean Mitchell. We have a show of Dean Mitchell's work. And by the way, you could have done it." And that's exactly what she said. She told them. She told me that. She said, "I told them, well, the Denver Art Museum, we said, but our little Foothills Art Center did it." And he said, "Really?" So he sent somebody over to look at some paintings to see about possibly acquiring some for the Denver Art Museum. They didn't acquire anything. They sent 2 curators over. They picked 2 paintings, and he suddenly couldn't make it over.
Huh.
He just suddenly couldn't get over to see the work. So they didn't approve the acquisition. But I'm just telling you how the layers of complexities are with a lot of stuff. And I just told Carol, I said, Carol, I said, really? They're going to buy a painting? I said, but the show's at the Foothills Art Center. So yeah, I had my suspicions about it. So because, like I said, power in the art world and who is endorsing someone, who says doesn't sell. So all that goes up, people's egos get involved and who they discover, who they find. I said, I'm at the Foothills Art Center. I'm not the Denver Art Museum. So why is he going to do that? I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying the politics of all this, there's a lot of layers. I'm just trying to tell people there, and I didn't take that as a rejection. I just said, you know what? It is what it is. Maybe he just didn't have the time. Maybe he feels like he's not at the Denver Art Museum. Maybe if we ever do something at the Denver Art Museum, maybe we'll acquire something then. But my thing was, I couldn't dwell on the fact of why he wouldn't come over, so that was his choice. And I can't get mad at the director for not coming. What I'm saying is people make choices for different reasons. Could have been a bunch of phone calls about me. Who is he? Where did he go to school? There could have been a whole lot of layers of conversation behind the scene that you know nothing about, why you don't sometimes get in the museum collection. Because a lot of times people call other people to say, do you know him? Or have you heard? Oh, who is this? I love his work, but who is it? All that stuff go on. Let's just face it. That's just human things that go on. And you just keep moving forward and you look up and the very people who didn't want you at one time are now calling you and knocking on your door, because I've had that to happen. So I've served on foundation things where they didn't even pay attention to me, and I got more recognition and a name, the New York Times article, all the stuff. Yes. Suddenly they start going, well, maybe we're missing something here, and suddenly they start calling you, want you to be a part of something. And at the time when you were trying to merge, when you didn't have anything, they wouldn't give you the time of day.
Exactly.
That's human nature.
Now
I don't get mad at it. It is what it is.
You spent $75,000 putting that book together?
That is correct.
And
I pre-sold the concept. Here's how I did it. I pre-sold the concept through a gallery.
Yep.
Record gallery who handled my work.
Okay.
Because it was going to be self-published. I offered an original drawing. And so if you buy the book by a certain date, you get the drawing for $200. If you buy past that date, it's going to be another $250 or $300.
Not a print of the drawing, but an original.
An original drawing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was drawing like crazy. So we raised about $30,000 to $35,000 before I had even started designing the thing. We had acquired, people had sent their money in to get the book and the drawing, and we had $35,000. So I was drawing like crazy to catch up. And I put the other $40,000 in on my own, because by then I had acquired quite a bit of money at that time, where I was willing to take the gamble on myself. And we published it. And not only did we publish it, it sold out. I went back and published more of them, and I made a huge, huge profit. Instead of making $2.50 a book, had I went with a publisher, right, I made about $30 a book.
Wow.
So you do the numbers. So that ended up being a good financial base for me. And Bryant Galleries became so popular for me. It was nothing for us to do between $300,000 to $500,000 at an opening.
Wow.
Yeah. And Bryant was selling over $1 million a year of my work. And I was working like nobody's business. And they were selling my very personal work, my very experimental work. And I was just kind of curious, well, Mr. Allen, who's buying? He said, everybody's buying your work. Black people, white people, people from Europe are buying your work. He said, people buy. And I said, international market. Made a world of difference, as opposed to somebody said, well, why aren't you showing in Kansas City? Because I was living in Kansas City. I said, well, Kansas City, I mean, it's not, there's nothing wrong with Kansas City, but it's not an international market. Who's traveling here internationally? There's nobody traveling here internationally that's going to buy art. I need to be in an international market. So I recognized that. I wasn't putting Kansas City down. I just had to look at the reality of what it was. It is what it is. And they were not going to the Midwest, but they were. New Orleans was an art destination. as
Okay.
well as Scottsdale and Jackson Hole and different, there were, Palm Desert. There are different places that are art destinations, and having your work in those places get you an international artist and get you a huge amount of international people looking at your work from all over the world. And that makes a world of difference. When you're on the main drive in New Orleans, which is the Rodale Drive of New Orleans, people look at you differently. And it was Bryant Galleries, again, the connection, again, because he said, I don't really make a lot of money off this. I just love art. And and so he had connections to the collectors that trusted him. And so this is a relationship business.
It really is. And it sounds like he had an emotional investment in your success.
Yes. And he really loved my work. He promoted me. He truly promoted my work. He really admired me as a painter. In fact, sometimes he even got into the point where he was trying to control what I painted. And I said, no, Mr. Allen, I'm doing some inner city street scenes now. And he said, we can't sell those black guys on the street and this, it looks like the gangs and this. He was like saying that about some of my urban scenes because I was living in the urban core in Kansas City. I sent him down there. I sent him to New Orleans anyway because his office was in Mississippi. He would come down for the opening. And I sent the paintings down there, and a guy who had just started his software company bought both paintings.
There you go.
I won't tell you how much he spent, but it was quite a bit. And Mr. Allen called me up and said, do we have any more of those urban scenes of the black people? And I said, no, I don't, Mr. Allen. He said, well, we're just letting you know we sold both of those to a collector. He was all proud. He was proud of the work that he had sold that he said he couldn't sell. And so from that day forward, he never bothered me about what I painted, what I did. He stopped. He said, I'm going to leave you alone. You just paint. I said, thanks, Mr. Because you always try and tell me to paint. Paint some more shrimp boats because I love doing shrimp boats. And I was just doing all this experimental stuff. He said, just let D. Mitchell do what he wants. Yeah, you just do what you want.
It's working.
So, yeah. So that was total freedom. But I had to take it in my hands. Now, had I listened to him and not sent the paintings, I sent the painting against his own judgment, and they put them up on the wall and they sold them. And so how many artists are going to send a gallery work that they say they don't want?
Right.
How many artists are going to send the owner of the gallery work that they're not going to want? But I figured, well, he's in Jackson, Mississippi. He only comes to the open. You'll see him up down there.
And they hung them.
They put him up. They put him
up.
Good
for you.
Yeah,
wow. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you.
Taking risks.
I mean, yeah. Somehow taking the right risks. You seem to have a good instinct.
Yeah, I dealt with a lot of galleries with that kind of stuff. And I just said, look, and I've tried different galleries, and galleries would approach me and they would say, well, I would like to sell your work. And I look at their websites. You don't have the audience. I said, you don't have the audience, but I'll give it a shot. And I said, don't get upset if it doesn't work out. And a lot of times it didn't work out, and it was okay. And I said, and they would feel bad, and I said, don't feel bad. It's okay. I didn't sell. You sold what, 2 things maybe. Don't feel bad about that. It's okay. I said, every artist isn't for you. It's okay. I'm fine with you not being able to sell them. I'll just move on. And maybe down the road we may try again. Who knows? Maybe not. But it just didn't work. Your collectors are just not interested in this type of work, and that's okay. And it's okay.
Well, I like your advice about the international market. That's really good advice.
Yes, that's huge. That's huge. And the fact that I'm financially stable, I'm not threatened if a gallery just doesn't want me anymore, or this or that, or I just move on.
Good for you.
And the internet, you can level the playing field in so many ways, but promoting yourself and internationally and all kinds of things. There's so many different ways now that were not available to us as artists. And so, I've heard horror stories about artists not getting paid and all kinds of stuff. I have not had that kind of issue. It's just, I've had a great career in this, and it's gone way beyond what I ever thought it would be. And I'm grateful for it, and I plan on staying true to myself. Whether I enter into the more, the upper bracket of the art world, it's not of concern to me. The fact that the work is true and it resonates to people when they see it, that's my main thing. The fact that I stayed true to myself, again, put me in front of Barack Obama to do his presidential portrait. That was based on a friend of mine. His name was Bob Ragland. It was a very honest portrait of him. The bottom line of it is that I ever think I would ever be, interviewed by the first African-American president of the United States to be considered to do his presidential portrait, being asked by a National Portrait Gallery. So, this is a dream that's surreal for me, growing up in poverty in the South and working in tobacco. It's crazy real. It's crazy, so I'm certainly not worried about rejection at this stage in my life. Oh my God, keep them rolling. I'm certainly not worried about rejection.